Libyan youth as part of our collaboration with the North African Policy Institute, which is an organization that's been put together by our host, Jean-Louis Romano-Peru, who I met when he was at Tufts University, working on a PhD before his move to Tunis. And we're delighted to be doing this. Other topics, in addition to the migration topic we're covering today, will include climate change, social reconciliation, and the role of youth, and the economic impact of conflict. You should sign up for our email announcements to receive invitations for these events going forward. And with that, I'm going to turn to Jean-Louis, and we'll get going. The substance is very important. It's going to be really interesting. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, and thank you for the MEI to partner with us on this series. We're very excited to give an opportunity to Libyan youth to share their perspective, which is unfortunately unusual and definitely refreshing. My name is Jean-Louis Romano-Peru. I'm the director of NAPI, although, unlike what you said, I cannot claim ownership. I have to pay tribute to my co-founders and my colleagues. It's definitely a collective endeavor. 2 words on NAPI. The North African Policy Initiative is an independent, non-partisan and non-profit NGO based in Tunisia. What we do is that we seek to improve participatory governance in North Africa, mostly by fostering civic engagement of large numbers of youth in particular, and by helping youth participate in the elaboration of public policy. So the activities that we carry out are mostly research, writing, advocacy, and networking. Today, you will hear the perspective on migration and displacement in Libya from some of these young policy leaders that I will introduce briefly. Before I do, allow me to make just a few framing observations on migration and displacement to set the stage for the intervention. Migration, as you certainly all are aware of, is one of the most important and enduring challenges of our time. And despite the tremendous opportunities that at least I believe it presents for both countries of origin and destination, it is perceived almost exclusively as a burden and as a threat, often forgetting human rights and dignity. The Mediterranean, and Libya in particular, are critical in this challenge. Libya is a country of origin. It is also a country of transit and a country of destination. As a transit, it is the main pathway for the central Mediterranean route for migration towards Europe, which is by far the deadliest. However, all 3 migration typologies have changed quite dramatically in the last few years, particularly since 2016, and in large part as a consequence to the foreign policy of the European Union and of its member states. This change, sadly, has not been for the better, not for the condition of hundreds of thousands of human beings, not for Libya's peace, not for Libya's governance, and for Libya's economic growth, as Malak will discuss. And certainly not for the cohesion, the coherence, and the credibility of the European Union and of its member states. In particular, one very worrisome phenomenon that emerged since 2011 is the explosion of human trafficking and smuggling, and that has flourished in Libya. These phenomena has increasingly penetrated, co-opted, and coerced at times state institutions, weakening governance, hurting the economy, dislocating society, and also fueling conflict. In turn, conflict and insecurity are by far the largest driver of displacement in Libya. Now, we must keep in mind that in addition to the national level conflict, which has recently subsumed since last summer, there are dozens of localized conflicts all across Libya, usually unbeknown to most. They are either active or simmering, can be ethnic, tribal, or geographic, and they pit communities against each other, producing displacement as well. Just a few numbers: in February of 2021, we had 245,000 IDPs accounted for by IOM, and over 620,000 returnees. That is an extremely high share of the total population of Libya, that is just barely over 6 million. Now, IDPs are decreasing in number. However, IDPs are also not all equal. They are, some of them have been displaced for a few months, others have been displaced for years. Think of the population of Tawerga, or those from Derna or Nzara. And the other aspect to consider is that they're not living all in the same conditions. Some do live in some settings, some self-paid accommodations, that's the bulk of them, but some live in very precarious conditions, in informal settlements that often fail to guarantee the basic services such as health and education. The speakers today and my friends and colleagues will definitely address and further elaborate on some of these points. So allow me to introduce them before giving them the floor. Mohammed Hammouma is not with us yet, but I will introduce him. He will join us from Zawiya as soon as he manages to find a proper connection, because he lost internet just 20 minutes before we connected. He is a program manager with Al Mutawassit Organization for Migration and Relief. He's also the co-founder of Innovative Club. He holds a master's degree in international relations and public policy from Howard University. Mohammed is a graduate from the North African Policy Initiative's Young Policy Leaders Program, during which he researched and wrote a policy paper on the condition of migrants in Libyan detention centers. I invite you all to read his very interesting policy briefing paper that you can download from napipolicy.org. Malaka Doudi joins us from Tripoli. She is a livelihood officer with the Danish Refugee Council. She focuses on economic recovery for individuals affected by conflict. She has worked for several NGOs, and she's interested in international politics, law, conflict resolution, and advocacy. She's a translator trained at the Faculty of Languages in Tripoli University. And she's also a graduate from NAPI's Young Policy Leaders Program, during which she researched and wrote a policy paper on supporting Libya's economy by facilitating the regularization of foreign workers in Libya. Mohammed Saad joins from Sirte. He is a lecturer at the Faculty of Chemical Engineering at University of Sirte. He's also an education program facilitator for UNICEF's education program in Sirte. Between 2012 and 2020, Mohammed worked with IDPs for ACTED. He was also mine risk education and small arms, live weapons awareness, team leader for Handicap International in Sirte. He is passionate about research, education, environmental protection, governance, and the plight of migrants and IDPs. He has background in chemical engineering and a master's in science in chemical engineering from Nottingham University in the UK. Mohammed Abu Araba joins us from Benghazi, but is originally from Tawerga. He is a community liaison at American Bar Association in Tawerga and Benghazi, and program manager at Bawater Foundation. In 2020, Mohammed was a protection officer with ACTED, carrying out research and support for IDPs. Between 2010 and 2019, he was team leader with the Scout Movement, one of the very rare NGOs that existed under the Gaddafi regime. He's also an educator with UNFPA's Y-Peer Youth Network in Libya, and he has an interest in the plight of IDPs and political sociology writ large. Mohammed has a bachelor in petroleum engineering from the University of Tobruk. He's a graduate from the Young Leaders Program from Friedrich Ebert Stiftung and a candidate for NAPI's Young Policy Leaders Program. Without further ado, unfortunately, Mohammed Hammouma hasn't joined us yet. Hopefully, he will be able to join us during our conversation. So let me turn to Malak and ask you, Malak, how has migration in Libya affected the economy?
Okay, can you guys hear me properly? Because I have a power cut as well, so I don't know if I should keep the camera on. Okay, so thank you, Jean-Louis, for that introduction. Obviously, as Jean-Louis mentioned, my policy paper was about supporting the Libyan economy by improving the work permits procedure for migrant workers in Libya. So the thing about Libyan economy is that it is suffering a shortage of menial workers, and only migrant workers can fill that gap. But they struggle to obtain work permits, and therefore they do not have a legal working status to work in the country. So the decrease of the documented workers has caused a shortage, which is damaging the economy in several Libyan municipalities. And the regulation of the legal status for migrants is key for three main reasons. So the first main reason is the high competition among unemployed Libyans to access the low number of public sector jobs available, which creates a high demand of workers in the private sector jobs that are mainly targeting migrants. Second, Libyans lack skills to perform menial work such as construction, cleaning, and certain medical jobs such as nursing and so on. The third reason is Libyans' unwillingness to perform menial works or menial jobs available in the market because it is considered socially unacceptable. So addressing the issue of work permits and providing a legal working status for migrants will ensure benefits for Libyans and migrants alike. So by issuing work permits systematically, the private sector, which is the main employer of foreign workers, will be more encouraged to provide these work permits for their workers. The second point will be that work permits will also facilitate the process of migrant labor registration, which will boost the local economic resilience and contribute to its recovery. Because when you issue work permits for migrants that are registered in a certain municipality, that will help fill in the key gaps of the labor market in that municipality or that identified area. Issuing work permits will also enhance the Ministry of Labor and Rehabilitation's capacity to monitor migrants' registration and employment through its, there is a particular unit in the Ministry of Labor and Rehabilitation that is specifically doing the job of monitoring the work and registration of a regulated procedure will lower the percentage of obviously informal employment among migrants and will reduce the exploitation that they have to endure, such as forced work or unpaid labor. One point that I think Libyans have been voicing throughout the years is that they disagree with providing more work permits for migrants, especially is that they assume that it would eventually allow workers to obtain the Libyan nationality, which is a big no for them. So the issue can only be solved by ensuring that providing this legal working status for migrants will not open a pathway for Libyan citizenship. Hence, that will reduce the tension and contribute to the social cohesion in the country in general.
Thank you, Malak. You give us a lot of food for thought. If you want to cut your camera, it may help with your connection because you are coming broken at times. So feel free to cut your video so that we can hear you better. Thank you for shedding light on that, and delighted that Mohammed Muma was able to join us. Salam, Mohammed. I already introduced all of you, including you, and I seized the opportunity to turn the floor to you. So why don't you give us also a sense of the government's approach to irregular migration writ large?
Okay, hi everybody. Actually, Libya, in the field of migration, Libya is acting according to an MOU that Libya signed with Italy back in 2017 and renewed in 2020. One of the main items of that MOU is that migrants trying to reach Southern European shores have to be Libyan waters or international waters have to be returned back to Libya. And the issue here is that the Libyan DCIM, which is the Directorate for Combating Illegal Migration, according to Libyan authorities, is that they are put in detention centers. They stay in detention centers until either they voluntarily ask for voluntary return to their countries, or the IOM or UNHCR try to to move them back to a third country. So one of the main issues here is that they stay in detention centers with very poor conditions in terms of food, in terms of medical assistance to migrants. The other issue is that they have to, when they ask for voluntary repatriation, they have to prove first that they belong to that country, because in most cases they lose their passports when they try to go or to migrate to Italy.
Thank you, Mohammed. So I'll turn towards Mohammed Saad, and now I'd like you to talk about how conflict impacts migration and displacement. And I think you're well placed. Sirte, being in the middle of the country, has been affected by multiple conflicts since 2011. Over to you.
Okay, thank you for inviting me. The intensification of conflict in Libya has affected millions of people across the country, driven vast numbers into displacement, because people, they are searching for, they are fleeing from conflict zone, and they are searching for safer areas and more safe cities. And the conflict has also impacted refugees and migrant populations, making their way towards Europe through one of the deadliest migration routes in the world. In recent years, Libya has been undergoing much tension, resulting from armed clashes and political conflict, which has placed a burden in most aspects of the Libyan society. The situation has led to instability in most government institutions and poor financial resources, and this has weakened the basic service provisions by all government institutions, including the sectors of health, education, energy, water resources, and social affairs. General insecurity have also impacted international aid agencies in Libya. So they withdraw their staff to the neighboring country, Tunisia, and they are now almost working remotely, and most of the assistance is being delivered by their partner national organization. They are doing the much needed humanitarian assistance. Regarding migrants and refugees, their situation has been, their irregular status in Libya has been compounded by political uncertainty, growing prejudice, and general insecurity. So there are migrant refugees, they are subject to several threats, including detention, arbitrary arrest, abductions for ransom. So and their situation is really quite bad, because asylum seeker and refugee, they are at risk even if they can prove that they have registered with UNHCR, and they are vulnerable, as I said, to forced labors, to abduction, to arbitrary arrest, and poor conditions in detention center. You know, the detention center are not safer from the conflict. You know, because detention center in a close, they are close to the conflict zone. They are exposed to aerial bombing. You know. One detention center in the eastern Tripoli suburb of Tajura has been bombed, killing at least 50 migrants and wounded 130 migrants. You know, so they are not safe. and the weak institution, government institution. I will now talk about my city of Sirte. It's the city of Sirte is far from the two official powers of the two warring camps, the two competing governments. So it has received less attention, and the government institutions is very weak. There is no strong authority. There is no strong, even military authority. This has created an environment of fertile ground for violent extremist group to control the city, and they have committed many brutal accidents in Libya, including the Egyptians migrant workers. They have kidnapped 21 migrant Egyptian workers, all of them Coptic Christians, and they beheaded them in a famous video which has published in the social media. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed. Indeed, I think everybody remembers that hideous video. I remind everyone that you can ask questions by writing them. You don't need to wait until the end, so you can start writing questions all along. If something catches your attention and raises your curiosity, and we will address them. We'll have the speakers address them at the end. Mohammed Abu Araba. We have three Mohammeds, so I may address you as your last name. You're an IDP yourself. You are displaced with your family since 2011, and I'd like to ask you the government's approach towards IDPs.
Yeah. Thank you, John, for inviting me for this session, and nice to meet you, Jonathan, and hi, everyone. The issues of the displaced is considered one of the important issues that Libya suffers from, as it was an inevitable result of the state of armed conflict in large areas in the country. The exasperation of this issue and the continuation science in Science 2011 places it on the priority issues related to achieving national reconciliation. Indeed, poor condition of the displaced are considered one of the most important drivers for achieving reconciliation. In fact, successive governments have only been able to do inventory of IDPs through the municipal offices to which the IDPs have been displaced, and where some NGOs have cooperated to do so. Actually, the government faces many challenges regarding this file due to the failure of democratic transition and the political division that lead to armed conflict due to the proliferation of weapons and the absence of the government authority, as it contributed to the continuation of the displaced crisis and the increase of areas of displacement in Libya. The government was unable to do anything toward this displaced, despite the presence of a minister of state for displaced affairs. Yet he was unable to do anything except
try to cut your video.
Consultation and meeting with some NGOs to discuss about the condition of now government and the war and fighting have stopped. The government should seek to unify institutions, support democratic transition, activate transitional justice and accountability mechanisms, and carry out comprehensive national reconciliation to solve many problems, and including the issue of displaced. Many challenges wait the government, and it must seek the assistance of NGOs to learn more about the conditions of IDPs and to know what challenges still stand in front of their return to their homes and other humanitarian challenges.
Thank you, Mohammed. Bear with us. So the connection is often precarious from Libya. So we will actually cover also an important point, I hope, about the role of NGOs. So I go back to Mohammed Hmouma. We also mentioned the issue of detention of migrants in Libya, which is a very, very hot one. Although official detention centers in reality only have a small fraction of the total population of migrants. It is an extremely contentious issue, but we forget also those who are detained in informal detention centers by non-state authorities. Mohammed, could you please give us, we lost you, Mohammed, Hmouma. So we'll go back to the detention centers. So I'll turn to Malak instead. Malak, back to foreign workers. Can you give us a better sense of what are the current policies towards foreign workers by the government? As far as I recall, there were virtually no work permits legally issued by authorities, although some mechanisms had been adopted informally in some parts of the country.
Yes, so I'm going to cut off my camera so that I don't, so my voice doesn't cut off. Okay, yeah, as you mentioned, Jean-Louis, yes, it has been very difficult to obtain a legal working status in the country for the past few years. So the fragile security situation in the country obviously contributes to the increasing number of illegal migrants because there is less border control and migrants are moving to Libya as mostly a transit point to migrate to Europe. In this respect, once on the Libyan territory, migrants have to face so many risks and issues such as exploitation, physical abuse, and unpaid labor. So the General Department of Passports, Nationality, Foreign Affairs, and the Ministry of Labor and Rehabilitation are the competent authorities for issuing work permits. So the first one is responsible for issuing the work permits, and the second is responsible for regulating them. According to Article 9 of Law Number 12 of 2010 on the promulgation of the Labor Relations Act, non-nationals cannot perform any work unless they obtain a license to do so from the competent authority. This law was obviously adopted in 2010, but it has not been applied regularly since 2014. Because the General Department of Passports, Nationality, and Foreign Affairs, which is the one that's supposed to be issuing them, has focused overwhelmingly on the implementation of the new passport system, and so it neglected other aspects of its mandate. I think another pivotal reason for the lack of issuing work permits is the influx of illegal migrants and the inability of the Ministry of Labor and Rehabilitation's ability to provide fixed numbers despite its efforts for the past few years to regulate the process in cooperation with the Ministries of Economy and Interior. So the Ministry of Labor and Rehabilitation also sought the assistance of human resources experts and business owners to establish companies to recruit these workers from abroad and organize a chaotic labor market. It also curb the trafficking of illegal migrant workers and regulate the relationship between the foreign workers and the recruiting companies. So the latest I think update about it is back in 2020, the Minister of Interior issued resolution number 577, which addresses the issue of migrant workers in the country by forming a special committee. So the committee is basically tasked with designing a more effective legislative framework and suggested, you guys still can still hear me because my connection is unstable.
Yes, we can still hear you. If
okay,
you want to
so
make the last point.
Yes, that's it. So as I said, the committee is basically tasked with designing a more effective legislative framework and suggesting ways to implement it. So a meeting was held in June, I think, at the Ministry of Labor and Rehabilitation in coordination with other governmental entities. The main task was supposed to be to design a strategy in line with the recent directives of the Presidency Council in accordance with the visions of the Ministries of Interior and Labor. So the committee agreed to review the legislation related to migrant workers and their professions. It would also suggest that the committee would start working on mechanisms to develop and facilitate the procedure and administrate the granting of procurement workers according to the requirements of the current state's needs. Back to you.
Thank you, Malek. Again, apologies for the connections, but there are no two ways around it. Connections with Libya are always a struggle. Mohammed Saad, back to displacement. Can you help us get a better sense of the nature of displacement in Libya nowadays and the condition of IDPs, which I understand is very diverse? And you're on mute.
Yeah, given the fact that the weak government institutions in Libya, they are not taking into account the conflict that's happening in Libya. So people, they leave their cities or their areas of origins. They are searching for better and more safe places. They are fleeing from the conflict zone. They are also trying to move to cities where there is more basic service provision. And there are also for many challenges for IDPs to return to their homes. So after the conflict ends, these families, they cannot go back to their homes because they have a fear of retaliations, and or either their houses are destroyed. For example, in the 2016 war in Sirte has left around 3,000 houses which completely destroyed to the ground. So there are 3,000 families that cannot go back to their areas, So they are either internally displaced in the city, or they are internally displaced in other cities, and they are, and also they have other issues because of the crisis in Libya, and since 2014, a major gap has emerged between the official and the black market exchange rate for the Libyan dinar, which has caused liquidity crisis and also caused inflation rising. So liquidity in some cities, people that cannot draw their salaries, from the bank because there is no liquidity. So they have to pay by check. Sometimes they travel to other city in order to pay commodity by check. When they buy by check, they charged maybe up to 50% of the commodity prices. So this situation has led to people to move or to internally displace to other cities where there is a liquidity, where there is more safety, there is no war, and where there is less electricity cut, and there is more opportunity for livelihood and for more opportunity for employment. So this is short about the IDPs. Also, would like to mention point about the refugees and asylum seekers in Libya. In Libya, they are not afforded adequate protection, because of their irregular status. There is no legislation that consider refugees and asylum seekers as a separate entity. Because the current legislation, they consider them as a migrant, all of them as a economic migrant. Because the economic migrant, they might have passport, they might have residence permit, but refugees, they don't have any proof of identity. They don't have a passport. They only have UNHCR document. So they find, they cannot move safely, or they cannot move freely in the city and between the cities because they don't have a document to prove their identity. And it's very difficult for them to access educations, to access schools, because they don't have a proof of identity, and the official document issued by UNHCR is not fully recognized by the government institutions. I would like to mention here about the schools. There are more than 50 schools has been completely destroyed in Libya. So children have lower access to school, and most of the school some of the school has been used as a shelter for IDPs, and some of them has been used as by militant, by armed group. So the school have very limited capacity, which has affected migrants and refugees. They have very limited access to school. Priority are given to Libyan, even Libyan, they don't have that enough access. And they also have a problem with, thank you very much, sorry.
That's okay. I'd like to also call in Mohammed Abu Raba to get some of your reflections, because you have a very intimate perspective on displacement from your personal experience, but also as Mohammed Saad for working with IDPs. So Mohammed Saad raised a number of very important points: houses destroyed, fear for retaliation, and so forth, the legislation. Would you like to follow up and give your perspective also on these topics and others regarding displacement in Libya?
Yes, according to displacement tracking metrics report for IOM, 60% of IDPs they live in rented houses or with their relatives, and many of these didn't receive humanitarian aid. So it's imperative to address their suffering. And 40% of IDPs they live in the campus and public places. They have received the initial response, and their condition is considered better than this. But the same difficulties are still facing many of the IDPs, many of whom have lost their income and their homes, and children whose schools were destroyed need to complete their education. Likewise, many of them have psychological and mental health problems because of effects of displacement and armed conflict, and what they have suffered throughout these years in poor humanitarian conditions, as well as the negative effects that occur because of gathering in camps, which makes girls are exposed to harassment and GBV. In addition, the lack of protection for IDPs in general. All of these problems need to be highlighted by the government first to address them and support NGOs. Through my experience in assessing their needs and which I was working with ACTED, everyone suffers from problems in finding foods because of the lack of income or work. For many of them, housing, education for their children, access to medical care. The most important thing, the absence of legal protection, which prevent them from returning to their homes due to the lack of security. Some IDPs have returned to their homes and were forced to displace it from them again due to the destruction of infrastructure, the destruction of their homes, and the lack of basic services such as education, health, work, and water due to the absence of government support for their return and the surface of their cities. Despite this, the sensitivity of the conflict still exists, And last month, we saw the forced evacuation of one of the camps in Tripoli that is refused to return to their homes because of the reason I mentioned before and other security reasons. So many problems the government have trade this, and the government must consult with the NGOs that works with the IDPs because they have a huge of data and the basic need assessment for them.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Turning back to Malak, you have a particular angle among the topics that you work on or research, that is the economy. I wanted to ask you your take on the challenges of economic recovery and sustainability for IDPs, economic sustenance.
Yes, I think I'm gonna shut my camera. I think Mohammed Saad already mentioned a couple of the things that I wanted to mention. So basically the economic status of, so my internet says that it's unstable, which is pretty cool. I don't know if you guys can hear me because it says it's unstable.
We do.
Yeah.
I do.
Okay. Okay, so the economic status of IDPs has not improved since the last conflict stopped, as they have been forced to not only provide for their families, which was a struggle to begin with, they have to take on the burden of having to fix their houses from the most recent conflict. And most of the time, as Mohammed Baraba mentioned, they have to pay off debt of rental because 60% of them are either staying with relatives or in rental places. So the effects of the economic crisis that hit the Libyan economy back in 2016 with the black market's control over the official exchange rate, and which deteriorated into the issue of liquidity and the overall inflation of basic commodities. These all kind of created a new socioeconomic categories or classes that did not explicitly exist in the Libyan social class before. So basically we were before divided into the three main social classes: the poor, the middle class, and then the rich, with some extensive variety to the rich. But now we have upper middle class, lower middle class, we have varieties of actual poorness, and it's basically affected all of the Libyan categories and social classes across the country. Given that most IDPs rely on some form of governmental compensation, be it from work they currently do or from any kind of social funds, they have been denied access to their money, as Mohammed Saad mentioned, either due to the governmental entity's ability to actually transfer money to their banks, or due to the bank's lack of liquidity, which in both cases kind of leads the IDPs to resort to negative coping mechanisms. So new projects have been developed to help IDPs overcome their struggle to achieve a sustainable income to rely on, one of which is the one that I'm working with in DRC currently. They launched a pilot project to support the economic recovery of IDPs. It's basically divided into three main parts, and the best part about it is based on the beneficiary's preference. So individuals who are interested in pursuing self-employment or upgrading their existing self-employment or retaining a functionality to their micro to small businesses are being targeted. The program is, as I mentioned, is divided into three main parts. The first is the vocational training. Obviously, the beneficiary can choose the type of training that they want, but the type of training is also based on an annual feasibility study of the labor market. The second is a home-based business, and as the name suggests, it is for those who aspire to start their businesses at home and are not limited to certain projects. We are not looking for cooking or sewing or selling products online. Anything that can be done at home is something that can be granted a home-based business, but to start a business at home. The last part is the startup business. Obviously, anything that is not home-based is considered the startup business. We've had some people wanting to work on agriculture, some want to work on marketing. We have some very, very, very interesting applicants so far. The prospective beneficiaries that we are targeting will be provided with accurate information on the market opportunities based on the market assessment, so that they will be able to make decisions or informed decisions about the sources of income they want to indulge in. And then there's a coaching package to ensure that their self-employment, they understand this aspect of self-employment and the benefits, the risks, the core competencies that are all required to run and successfully generate revenue from their businesses. Yeah.
Thank you, Malak. I will turn towards Mohammed Saad from CIRT. Can you tell us your perspective on the role of international organizations in supporting IDPs and migrants?
Okay. Yes, I think international aid organizations are doing advocacy works about the humanitarian rights of refugee and migrants in Libya. I would like to focus here about refugee and asylum seekers, because they are the most vulnerable category. There is a need to develop national asylum legislations that provide them with protections and access to services. So there is international organizations are putting more pressure on the government, and they are working with the government institutions to develop national legislation for refugee and asylum seeker and distinguish them from other migrant workers. And international organizations are conducting mine clearance operations, especially in south of Tripoli and in Sirte and Benghazi in other areas, because people cannot be safely back to their homes, because the physical presence of the remnants of wars and mines will restrict their movements. Also, this has caused many casualties and deaths, including women and children. So they are also providing life-saving humanitarian aids to IDPs who are fleeing from the conflict zones, and also for refugee and migrants in detention centers, and also for migrant and refugee who are rescued at sea. And also there is more work about to ensure that refugee and asylum seekers not return back to their country of origins. This is the concept of because they face the issue of indirect refoulement, because refugees, they are out of their countries because of well-founded fear of persecutions because of race, religion, or political view. So if they are sent back to their country, they will be put in, there will be dangers on their life. So there is no, So more advocacy works about the refugees and asylum seekers, because in Libya now, they consider them as a migrant. So this is a really big issue that these refugee and asylum seekers, because they cannot even move inside the city. They ask them for identity proof. They don't have any identity. They only have UNHCR document, which is not fully recognized by the Libyan authorities. So more the international aid organizations, they are currently working on this issue, and there is need for more work on this issue.
Thank you very much. I'd like to have also the perspective on local NGOs, because there is not just international organizations who are active in supporting, helping and protecting IDPs and migrants. Maybe Mohammed Bouaraba, you can tell us a few words about the role of local NGOs in supporting IDPs and maybe migrants. It's too bad we lost Mohammed, who actually belongs to one of the NGOs and is director of another, who actively engages in supporting migrants. Over to you, Mohammed Abu Araba.
I think the local NGOs provided some support for the IDPs, but the lack of experience and lack of funding was an obstacle to them, as many of them were receiving support. So many of them, local NGOs receiving support from business persons or aid from food and non-food companies, and this made their role limited. But the NGOs tried to train local NGOs, and recently I see good results. For example, when I was working with Active in our project was related to humanitarian protection of the IDPs. But our task also is train local NGOs on the same approach that we do to transfer the expertise and tools to them. Even they could do same work, and with some final support, results and impacts are beginning to emerge. I believe that with some good training and gaining the necessary experience, the necessary experience, the local NGOs will be able to deal and respond to many crises in Libya, especially science that works in this organization are local from the same community and are well aware of the context there. Yeah.
Thank you. Actually, I'll cite also another example with a slightly different angle on the impact of the work of local NGOs in supporting migrants, which is the cultural and also the relationship with authorities. In Tripoli, there's an urban setting in which migrants have gathered and found shelter. They were regularly attacked locally. And luckily, through the great engagement of 3 local NGOs, one of which headed by Amal El-Haj, they brought help to migrants, and they spoke with local authorities, succeeding in doing things that international organizations would have not succeeded in doing. Oftentimes, international organizations raise suspicion and, if not animosity, for providing aid to migrants and IDPs. But when it's a local NGO doing it, this issue is overcome. It actually creates a phenomenon of imitation and greater social acceptability of supporting these populations. So the experience in Tripoli with these NGOs was quite useful and favorable. We have 2 things to do, and I can already foresee that we will go over time by a few minutes. One is to take the questions that we received from the audience. And the second is also to give a chance to Jonathan to share a few words and thoughts from the broader perspective, both regional and the role of international organizations. Let me start with questions. So, Jonathan, you asked many, so I'll only pick one so to give a chance to others. But you asked Malak if you could share your perspective on whether work permits should be granted to all irregular migrants, or what procedure should the state adopt to decide which migrants should get work permits.
Okay, so with the complete legalization of migrants that enter the country, even if they don't have proper papers, there have been actually initiatives by governmental entities in the past, I think in 2014, where they tried to register even illegal workers just so that they would be able to monitor their work. So even if they do lack some form of legal work, working papers, or even papers to prove their identity, they can still be registered in municipalities, the Ministry of Local Governance, there are so many entities that they can be registered in order for them to have some form of a legal status to work in the country or even to exist in the country. Because otherwise they would only end up either in the detention centers, which are basically just large prisons, or they would also live with the fear of being abducted all the time, or being kidnapped, or all of those kinds of other kinds of exploitation. So when they have some form of a working status legally, it reduces all of these risks that they have to endure without them.
Thank you very much. Very concise and very clear. We have a question from Lana Askari. So I believe that some of your question has already been addressed in part from Mohammed Saad and Mohammed Abu Araba when you were asking about security issues related to the return of IDPs, when they mentioned the fear of retribution. But you ask if there are also other reasons for not returning, and if these fears are still present today for risks of retribution. Mohammed Saad and Mohammed Abu Araba.
Mohammed Abu Araba and I were actually talking about this yesterday.
Okay, go for it, Mohammed.
Okay. I think as the people they steal IDPs, they face many challenges to return their cities, because many of challenges faced them. I mentioned before in this session. Like example, the basic service. There is no schools to study their children there. There is no basic medical service to get it when they need it, and many of people of IDPs don't have income there in their home, but in the Tripoli or in Benghazi, like NGOs activities do, like Malak livelihood assistant officer do some activity to return their income. So that's points help them for recovery their life and start their life in this cities.
Thank you very much. I have two questions that I'm going to lump together. Mohammed Saad, tell me if you want to add some remarks to this. I have two questions that I'm going to lump together. One from Tahani Mugarbi, nice to have you, Tahani, and another one from Abdul Salam Badr. Abdul Salam was asking about data, if there are databases showing the countries of origin of migrants in Libya, and Tahani was asking if there is a digital platform or that has number, basic information, and more information about irregular migrants in Libya. One answer is definitely the DTM system by IOM, but maybe over to you, Malak.
Yes, John, we actually mentioned it because IOM has an annual report with all of the numbers and all of the updates that happen throughout the year about the migrants, the number of migrants in each municipality and each muhalla of each municipality. So I can share the link if that's possible of the report. It is available online though, you can look it up, the IOM annual report of 2020. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. You can probably do that in the chat. You can share the link and inshallah everyone can see it. A question from Imad Bashrawi Shukruna asking about security measures by the governments to fight terrorism and human trafficking and smuggling. I don't know if any of you actually has any expertise on that, but or if you want to address this question. So it's slightly off topic. It is definitely important, but I'm not sure that we have the answer for you. Let me turn to another question from Samira Buslama from the Human Rights Service at Roundtable. So she's asking if you can share the experience, best practices in helping and assisting migrants by local NGOs in Tripoli or also elsewhere in the country. I wish Mohammed were here. And of course, Anzmir is interested in possibly replicating these good practices. So all of you, if you have any perspective on it, I know that you're all implicated and knowledgeable about some of the aspects of the role of local NGOs. Mohammed Saad, why don't you give us your perspective? Can you hear us? So Mohammed Saad may be having some internet connection as well.
Yeah, yeah, John, I heard some local NGOs work with migrants and refugee do some activities to raise awareness from population and from the local community to give them their human their rights and their dignity, and try to raising awareness to do with these migrants and refugee, to do like human, I mean to do some activities to raise awareness to people to do with them by respect. I heard some NGOs do some activities and training for people there.
Thank you.
Hello, do you hear me?
Yep, loud and clear.
Yeah. There is local NGOs who are working to assist refugees. They are offering them many services, including non-formal education, because especially for the children who are dropped out of school, they give them non-formal education classes. They are preparing them to the official and public schools. They provide them with the medical assistant and psychosocial support. Also, they have conducted several awareness campaigns with the local communities about the rights of refugees and migrants, because there is social perceptions about refugee and migrants as they are disease carriers, moral destructions, and they are the causes of high criminal rates. So there are some local NGOs, they are working to spread the awareness about the right of refugees and how to include them into the Libyan societies.
Thank you. Still on this topic, another question that I'm going to share now comes from Paolo Cutita. He puts the finger on another issue, which is funding. And he would like to learn a little more about how local NGOs look for funding, and if they are selective when they have to choose the donor or the partner organization, and or if international organizations actually search for local partners to support migrants and IDPs. Malak?
Yes. So from my personal experience from working with an international organization and having to partner up or cooperate with local NGOs, I think most of the time they're just looking for funds, not particularly from certain people. They're just looking to fund their work. And they're looking for any opportunity to work with international NGOs and learn from that experience, because they do grow after working with INGOs, and they do take on a lot of the information that is being used from our aspect, from our side. I think one of the biggest challenges that they need is their lack of functionality, not knowledge to function properly in the. They do understand the context, but they do not they don't really understand the tools or what they need to implement what they want to do. We've partnered up with a few local NGOs for the past few years, and we're still partnering up for the new project that we're doing right now. And they all just want some form of, not just funds, but they also want some form of knowledge to receive from, or experience to receive from us as an international organization.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I have the last question. We're out of time, but it's actually a double question. So I'll ask you maybe to share some succinct observations. Walter Wells asks your perspective on the impact of COVID-19 on one side and the looming threat of climate change on the other, in complicating the work with migrants and IDPs.
Yes, can I? I will talk about the COVID-19, the restricted movement and curfew that has been imposed by the national authorities in response to the COVID-19 emergency situations. This has a bad effect on the refugee and migrant, because they depend on the informal economy and the daily labors. So this has because they only work as a daily workers, you know. They have very limited opportunity to get a job with the Libyan government. So they work as a daily workers. So COVID-19 have a bad impact on the economic situations of refugee and migrants in Libya, you know, affecting them, because they have to pay very high rents. Especially there is many IDPs in Libyan cities. This has led to high rent rates, high accommodation rent, and they have to pay for very high prices of basic commodities and food. So COVID-19 has has largely affected the refugee and migrants.
Thank you. Mohammed Bouaraba or Malak, would you like to share any final thoughts on maybe the impact of climate change on migration and displacement?
I think it would be safe to say, as a Libyan, that we're focusing so much on survival that we're completely oblivious to the issue of climate change. And the only opening that was available to us to actually learn about this issue was last year, when everybody stayed at home and nobody was actually moving. We knew that that's how we learned to an extent that it is a huge issue, that by staying at home we actually saved the planet to an extent. But other than that, we were completely oblivious. We were so focused on survival for the past few years, and God knows how many more to come.
Thank you. Mohammed Bouaraba, one final word on this aspect, maybe.
Yeah, yes, I think for the climate change, as Malak said, and I don't have any word to say now, because I think I said I'll think I know about the IDPs in Libya, and I benefit from the colleges from experience with working with migrants and refugees.
Thank you. I'll just say one.
Can I add the point here about climate change?
Okay, please do.
The impact of climate change is clearly evident in the MENA regions. Extreme weather conditions has occurred in the regions, long periods of droughts and rising temperature. All of this has led to a shortage of water, and also led to a low rainfall. Precipitations has led to crops failure. So especially people who are living in the small cities, because they don't have enough water, low precipitations of rainfall, long period of drought. So they lost their livelihood, they lost their crops, there is no water, they mainly depends on water for agriculture. So people are moving to larger cities, to urban cities. This is one impact of the climate change. Also, impact of the climate change, Libya mainly depends on the underground waters, and because of the rising sea levels and low precipitation rate of rain, this has led to salinity of many coastal aquifers. So it's salt, so they cannot use it for agriculture sectors, and they cannot use it for drinking water. So this is brief on the impact of the climate change in Libya.
Thank you very much. Yep. And actually, Mohammed Saad was one of the panelists of another recent roundtable that we did in partnership with the Mediterranean Youth Water Network on climate change in the Mediterranean. And we covered some of these points. You may find it online. Two things for those who do not know Libya very well. It's a very urbanized country. The urban population compared to North African countries, I believe, is quite higher, unlike what people may think. That's one thing, and it's not surprising that the bulk of IDPs are in the three largest cities, Misrata, Benghazi, and Tripoli. A second aspect is that 95% of Libya is semi-desertic, and therefore it will become even more arid due to climate change. And third element, Libya sits right on the Sahel, the border of the Sahel, where populations are very severely affected by the change in climate, and therefore pressure for migration may only increase. Thank you very much for your very interesting observations, for sharing your perspective, which is, my point of view, very precious, very pertinent, and very legitimate. I hope that you'll be continuously involved in forming policies to respond to the challenges that you raised. And you can always count on us for being there with you in supporting you and providing these solutions. I'd like to turn the floor to Jonathan Weiner. Thank you again for hosting us and organizing this. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Jean-Louis, and thank you all. I learned a lot from each of you. We're grateful for what you're doing with an incredibly difficult set of circumstances in tracking and engaging on this issue. I don't know of any government in the world that deals properly with migration, that has found a formula to address both migration for work, people who want to stay in a country and get jobs, and the problem of transit, people who are looking to go elsewhere. It requires cooperation between countries of origin, transit countries, and countries of destination. The countries of origin, in some cases, it really is purely economic migration. In other cases, they are people who are leaving as a result of threats to their safety and lives. So in some cases, that's based on governmental and political. In some cases, it's based on things like women having no rights and being abused by men, by partners. The United States, this is a major political issue, and no one has been able to address it very effectively. In the EU, it's been a major political issue. It's helped cause governmental change, moving governments to a more authoritarian right-wing position. So getting it down to where you can discourage people from moving when possible, prevention, protect people who have moved, who are in transit, who are not at home, and then prosecute people who are profiting off the migration, who got the business of smuggling, are all three critical elements of the policy. But while those are ideas and labels, the ideas and the labels are insufficient to deal with the magnitude of the reality. And the last point that I would make, and then I want to talk institutionally for a minute, is that the lives of the poor in almost every country in the world, any country of any size, are already very, very desperate. And climate change and COVID make the lives of the poor even more desperate. Migrants and internationally displaced people are kind of below even the poorest, because they have more limited networks, they have more limited opportunities, they've got greater pressures on them, people can prey on them. So you're adding to people who are in greatest need every time that you're dealing with this issue. And this creates an almost ineradicable hostility between countries that have become destinations for migrants and displaced persons and those persons, which NGOs are then supposed to moderate and fix without a lot of resources, which isn't tremendously fair to the NGOs and the people working in them. They have to do the best they can, which is what is inherently a very, very tragic and difficult situation. So the best thing one can say about it is every effort at alignment between governments and NGOs to support one another in protecting, preventing, and when appropriate, prosecuting is all potentially helpful. Hearing voices of people who are on the ground doing the work and observing is tremendously important for people in Washington. When major governments get things wrong, it's because they don't have a good enough sense of what's happening in the field where reality is. So thank you for sharing your realities with everybody who participated in this call. I look forward, Jean-Louis, to further collaboration between MEI and with NAPI, and particularly in advancing the presence of people such as Mohammed Malik today. It's been really a tremendous way to spend one's time and to learn. Thank you. Look forward to the next one.